Welcome to What I Meant to Say, where we discuss parenting, relationships, and wisdom that can be passed down through generations. Well, I am here today with Spencer Wickens, Al Rodriguez, assistant head coach at Stanford University. And Spencer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, it's good to be here. It was a ton of fun coaching your son this past year and getting to know him. And, I'm just happy to be a part of anything that's volleyball related. So, this is awesome being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I knew when I came in this season, and I missed one game. I only watched one virtually this whole season because being Luke's last season, I just didn't want to miss anything. It's been such an amazing ride, and like I said, I am a Stanford volleyball fan for life now because the ride from cut program to getting to know all those guys and watching them band together and get the program back and have those 4 years after COVID was just. It was life-changing. I know for the athletes, but even for me, just to see them bond and do what they did from the 14-guy roster as sophomore year. And I know you were playing at Pepperdine then, and I was going back through the Pepperdine memories. But, when I got to watch you coach, Luke was so excited when they brought in, some young blood this year. And I got to watch you coach that first time. I was like, wow, you coach with so much joy. And that rubs off on all the athletes. And I loved watching you play, but when I saw you coach, I was like, that is something I would love to capture. So maybe we can start there and just the joy that you're finding in this coaching position. How, tell me about that.
Well, the joy that comes from coaching for me is it's always been in my blood and it's always been a part of my family and who I am, right? So my family grew up in a very large part of the sport in Rochester, New York. My dad has started a club-based bootlegger back in 1979, which has competed across the country in club tournaments, nationals, qualifiers for years and years and years. It originally started out as a men's and women's travel team that they went to compete, similar to how the VLA is run now. But eventually in the 90s, they started some boys and girls youth programs as well. So it has been in my blood forever. He was a collegiate coach as well. He ran both men's and women's programs at Nazareth College. My mom played. My sister and brother both played. A lot of things that we did as kids together around going to dad's practice, setting up a badminton net in the backyard and playing, blowing up a balloon in the living room and setting a line of pens across the middle of the floor just to go 50-50 one-on-one with my younger brother. It's always been a part of stuff that I've done. As a player, it was a part of my greatest memories growing up, and whether it was winning close matches, building relationships, or learning life lessons, volleyball was always at the center of what I was doing. And I'm just grateful as a career now, I'm able to still be involved with, the sport that I love, right? I love being at the collegiate level because I had such a good experience at Pepperdine as a player. And I just want to give back that same feeling to other guys. And coaching is the number one way for me to do that. I'm grateful to be up at Stanford and doing that. So it's been such a fun volleyball journey for me. It's been so fun having volleyball still be such a big part of my life, even as I get older. Now, as it's my career, before when it was just a hobby and a love for a game that I had when I was a little kid.
Yeah, and you have had such a journey. Like I said, I remembered watching you at Pepperdine because you and Luke are only, a couple years apart. So, to go so quickly from player to coach at such a high level, it's amazing to watch. But I enjoyed watching you play there. And you went from libero to outside hitter at Pepperdine. Oh, yeah. And I know that's like Luke's the opposite. Obviously, that occurred to me. But to be able to go to an outside hitting position, and I know there's so many undersized guys out there that would love to do that. Do you have any tips? Like what was your mentality in being able to make that jump?
So the best piece of advice I could give is just be ready to jump on any opportunity you can to help out or impact your team in a positive way, right? I think a lot of kids now have expectations of what they're looking to get out of an experience. Now, I don't think there are as many kids that are just ready to go jump in into an experience and just give whatever they have, right? If they don't give the immediate feedback of getting what they're looking for, right? Excuses start to be made, right? It starts to be he or she's fault, his, not mine, right? Accountability gets to be a little bit lost on the oneself, and blame gets to be placed on other people. And that's a big challenge with collegiate sports. It's a big challenge with offering scholarships for any program because you have these expectations of what you might be like. But the best advice I can give is just be ready to give what you can for any opportunity that shows up. And for me, that was as a libero originally, didn't quite work out, and an opportunity to play outside stepped up. And then for Luke, it's interesting because, right, he was an attacker. A position opened up where we needed him to potentially fill the libero role, and he just jumped into it 100% ready to go, right? And I'd be saying, I could be saying this because he's your son, but we need more players like Luke out there that are just ready to jump at any opportunity they can get to help out their team. Because at the time for me, it was in practice. We had pin hitters getting injured. It was, we need to save some jumps for some of these guys. Spencer, you've done it before in club. Can you do that role now? Right. It was not with the intention of me playing ever. I remember David having the conversation with me next year, like, hey, we want you to be a leader. We want you to still be who you are, but we have some guys that we probably will play in this outside position before you. So for me, even then, it was just, what can I give to the team to help these guys out and compete? And that might have meant just making the gym as competitive as possible, but just being ready to jump on any opportunity you can to help your team out.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important thing. I'm so big on team leadership. There's so much talk about leadership out there, but I find it interesting that I'm just starting to see that concept of team leadership really being talked about. I've heard it on Gervais' podcast, Finding Mastery, and I had sent it to Coach Costi. I was like, hey, this is a great one. Mm-hmm. Just for people to just, not that he needs any tips on that, but, just to have that conversation with high-level people that understand that team leadership is such a component to winning. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you build that among college guys in this like NIL driven arena that college athletics is headed into?
Well, for me, it was always bring it back into perspective and bring it back to the people that helped you get there to where you are. And, having that as your purpose and drive rather than the things that you can be given short term, right? You can always give back to the people that helped you. You can always compete for the guy next to you. I think those external forms of motivation of playing for other people is, the best motivator for me. And that's something that we try to help these guys see versus, playing to get whatever quid pro quo deal you can get. Because in the men's volleyball world, there are some of those, but they're not as intense as what you might find in other areas in college sports.
Yeah.
In any matter of the fact, right? Men's volleyball is a small world in the NCAA. We have to stick together, right? And we got to make sure that the intent of what we were going to play in college for in the first place is still there. And it's not just to get something back directly right away with an NIL agreement. It's not exactly to just get playing time right away as a freshman. It is to have an experience over your time there, right, where you develop as a player and then develop as a person too. So I think motivating kids through playing for why they love the game originally, for the people that help them, right, for their teammates grinding next to them every day, that's the motivation that really meant a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Luke's going to look back on his career and know that he's got those lifelong, not just teammates, but friendships that, supported him all the way through. And those memories are like, they're invaluable to the way you go in life. And I know you have some of those. Who are some of the people that you played with that really have shaped your way?
Oh, first and foremost, my brother, growing up and playing against him in the backyard and, in the racquetball courts at Nazareth, in the living room, right? He by far has pushed me as a competitor more than anybody. Part of that is he's my younger brother, and he was always catching up. And now we're at a point where he's probably a lot better than me as a player, which is, it sucks to say out loud, but I'll say it. Another guy that was a huge role model for me growing up was Dane LeClaire. Dane LeClaire played at Loyola Chicago. He was 2 years older than me, and we ended up playing club for a couple years together, and then played high school for a couple years together. And sadly, he tragically passed away back during COVID. And he had an accident falling off of a building. But when he was a player, when he was around, he was a great leader. He was charismatic in the sense that when he stepped in the room, you could tell he was there. He instilled belief in you by showing and by proving to you that you could do it. You could do whatever, you could accomplish whatever, or get over whatever challenge was in front of you. Right. We had grinded and practiced and competed, and he always looked back to the training that we had and put it into perspective in that way. Even though we were playing one of the top teams from California, it didn't matter because all the work that we had put in, right, had prepared us for that moment, right? And he was also great at, standing up to the moment. When we were a small club team going into some of these bigger tournaments, playing against all these big teams, right, it was, hey, it's us versus the world right now. Let's throw caution into the wind. Let's just play our best ball. And, playing with somebody like him, greatly affected the way that I tried to lead as a player later on. I looked up to him not only because he was older, not only because he was a high school teammate of mine, but because he was a true leader and then showed it in the way that he competed and did all the things that he was talking about. And that was the guy that I wanted to be like in college for sure. Um, I mean, when it got to college, and I was a freshman, some great senior leadership came from guys like Weston Barnes for me. I mean, he was a libero in my position. He was a senior about at the time that I got there. He had a great perspective of what the collegiate experience was like. Managing everything in your life outside of just volleyball was huge for him as well. Volleyball had not always been his best friend, right? And that was something cool to hear as someone who has always had had always had a good relationship with volleyball for the most part, right? So he was a big help when I started dealing with real life issues in college, right? And he helped me navigate those struggles as well. So there's been players that I've had and teammates that I've played with that have been a huge help for me over my career. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing because I noticed when I listened to you on the Out of System podcast and to listen to someone like Luke who played from the time they're 12, and I know even younger than that. Like I remember dropping Luke off with all the girls because the way the sport has grown in your guys' generation it's amazing. Because when we were living in Fresno and I was taking his older sister to expose her, and he's like, I want to go. I'm like, okay, be the only boy in the gym. And to see the way that it's grown now and the way you guys are becoming role models for these younger guys when you go around, at First Point Classic in Austin and doing those clinics for the clubs and to have for those guys to have role models to look up to, getting those lessons out, because it's amazing the way this sport has grown. And it is such an incredible community of guys with such good character because they love the sport so much. I mean, men's volleyball wasn't created out of accolades. It's just because there was so much joy in the way you played the game, right? Absolutely. And people aren't in it. You're not in it. No one's in volleyball for the money, right? So I just love the community because it's such a grassroots, passionate bunch, and it's fun to watch it grow. And that article in the Wall Street Journal the other day,
awesome.
For men's volleyball to be making the Wall Street Journal, I never thought I would see that happen. So,
yeah, wherever you go, for me, men's volleyball has a tight-knit community. Coming back to Rochester and the people that I grew up with, they're still there. There's people that played for my dad in the 90s that have kids now that are playing for him again. So it's really cool to see what you have up here with the club scene in Northern California, with all the colleges up here having programs, right? It's great. There's a great support program for men's volleyball, right?
Yeah. And growing up in New York and obviously having parents that were coaches and volleyball players, but do you see a big difference in the mentalities regionally? Like the type of athlete that's coming out of Rochester, New York versus a California athlete? Can you compare and contrast? Do you have anything to say about that?
The best way I can say that is that there's just so much more opportunity still in places like California, where you have many more kids that are playing. The pool of kids that you can pull from is larger. And also when you think about coaching too, a lot of the best players that have, maybe grew up in California, went to school in California, they probably still live in California. So the best access to coaching are still in some of these hotbed areas like Southern California, Northern California, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Madison. There's clubs that have been up there for a long time. There's, Virginia Beach. There's so many different clubs now to Florida that have risen up and have had people involved there for so long. So you just got to make sure you find yourself in one of those pockets, right? And then there's a little bit larger pockets in some of these other areas, right? Compared to Rochester.
Yeah, but you still found a way. I mean, you got to keep the competition level high, I would think, to get to the level that you were playing at in college.
Absolutely. And I mean, maybe the director's kid or coach's kid is a specific group, right? But even the guys that we come in contact to now that have been playing from a young age, that have been playing for parents that either played or parents that still coach, right? They seem to get those lessons a little bit earlier. I don't know if there's a little bit more tough love in the way that they're raised and the way that they train when they're kids. Because my first experience as a volleyball player, my first coach was Roger Worsley. And I don't know who out there knows Roger Worsley, but he is a great trainer of the game. He used to coach at RIT. His sons, Joe and Gage, have gone on to be great players now. And he held us accountable for more things than I've ever been accounted for in my life. at 10, 8, 9, 10 years old, right? And he was
And beyond volleyball. When
beyond
you say
volleyball,
how, yeah,
right? He wanted us to go after every play, right? There was no whining and complaining if we didn't get what we wanted. There were just lessons that we were hearing and having to deal with as a kid far earlier than what other kids were experiencing with, right? And that
yeah,
might be part of the director's kid experience, right? There, it's very rare that you have that type of family out there, but I think that's that's one of the benefits that comes with learning sports at a young age. You learn really quickly how to play together in a team. You know, your own interests don't matter anymore. It's the team interest and what's best for them. And that was something that was huge for me. And, some of those conversations that we had as when we got into the USA gym, when we got to the Collegiate gym, it's like those had already been a statement for me that I look back to every day. Right. So that was fun.
yeah.
That was an advantage probably for me.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen a trend of athletes I've interviewed that have come through that are, you know, gym rats,
Yeah.
so to speak, coaches' kids and, just grew up loving the game and were challenged at a very early age. But they also responded well because I've come to believe you really you can't force it as a parent, and I think that gets to one of the pain points because there is a pain point out there between coaches
Sure.
and parents right now, and I know a lot of coaches get exhausted, especially in the juniors game because they're doing it for the love of the game, but the parents sometimes can put a wrinkle in that. And do you have any perspective on the way that your parents did that? I know they were coaching, but do you feel like you got a perspective from both sides?
I'm going to say absolutely. I mean, I remember the car rides as a kid where all of a sudden it was business time and my dad was on the phone in the car and I wasn't there anymore, right? And he had to talk to some of the club parents, right, about whatever issues were going on, right? And I think the club world is a very interesting world because, right, you're buying a product, you're buying a service, right, and you want something out of it. And it's very hard to see, um, the growth of what your kid is doing if he's not playing. I mean, that's a big issue for sure. Um, with practice times and how coaches sometimes schedule practice, if you get parents that were players, maybe they think about the game a different way. That's an issue that we had specifically with our club because we had a lot of volleyball families that had been around the game for a long time too, and they were potentially going back and forth with some of the coaches over what skills they were teaching, right, or how they were teaching it, right. And there's a fine line there as well as just the whole argument around playing time and if their kid's happy or not. So it's it's a pretty gnarly field of play,
Yeah,
parents versus coaches, right, and the directors. I think directors can go about that very differently. We ran such a small club that my dad knew the names of every family, every player, other parents in the gym, right? And he
yeah,
was able to have conversations with them, and that was because we were a small club. We only had 1 to 2 teams a age group, and as we got to 16, 17, 18, we for sure only had one team because there weren't as many guys around to form even 2 teams, right? But then coaching in Nebraska, I worked for a club called Volleyball Club Nebraska. Their director, Maggie, she uses this third-party app, right? And all communication is done through there. Communication does not directly go from parent to player at all. And she's able to have all the conversations with parents that she needs to have and kind of saves her coaches from having those conversations. So there's ways that you can kind of go around that and structure it in your club. But I think the number one thing that you have to understand potentially as a parent going into a club is what is the goal of that club? Is it to try to win gold medals at nationals? I think it's a very real thing still, right? People are out there trying to win. Is it a developmental club where they're looking to provide equal opportunity for their players? I think you got to really look into the mission, right, and the vision of what the club is looking to do because there's options out there for whatever you want. There's options if you want to go try to win a national championship as a player and be on the best club team and get recruited. Those are right real options now that you can find anywhere. Right. There are also options even within some of those clubs or in different clubs where you can play local tournaments. Right. And it's not as much of a commitment to go play at these large convention centers. That's not for everybody. Right. It doesn't need to be for
yeah,
everybody. So I think
yeah,
that is something you have to look into early on. Right. When your kids figuring out what they want to do and what their interest is, right? What is the mission and vision of the club itself? Are they looking to go win, right? Are they sending players to college perennially? Or are they looking to just have fun on the weekend and play together and learn lessons, right? That's what you got to look for.
Yeah, and both are valid. I mean, I think there's if you're a parent out there, the ability to really read your kid's desire and let them lead that charge rather than having it be a goal that you have. And,
Mhm.
people have asked, oh, he got to Stanford. I was like, yeah, I feel like I just drove him to practice and picked him up, and he always wanted it. And you've really got to gauge that desire from the kid
Yeah,
to play or to play for fun. And that's the beauty of the game growing. Like you say, there are so many different opportunities and ways that anyone can benefit from the game at any level.
yeah,
Everyone thinks about the Division 1 opportunities, but they're few and far between compared to the experience of playing volleyball with your friends and traveling a little or traveling a lot and all
yeah,
of the things that you gain, even if you never even played in college. I mean, there's so much to be said for keeping a kid busy in an environment in a community that is so positive and uplifting that, that's always my silver lining that I give to parents. Is like, it really in the end is not about, especially for the parent,
yeah.
the journey to collegiate sports. It's what does the athlete want out of their journey, and how can you support that?
Absolutely. And the cool thing
Yeah.
with the boys side is that those two areas, going for gold and being competitive as possible, and then playing with your friends, kind of they blend in a lot
Oh,
of places, right?
it's beautiful.
It
Yeah,
is.
fine.
All of a
Yeah,
sudden, you could be your Southern California kid, right? And you're 10, 12 years old, and all of a sudden you're playing with your friends one day, and playing with your friends turns into playing in the 12U championship, right at national.
totally.
That could totally
I,
turn into it. For me, it
I,
was I loved playing. This is the one team I can play for. It's all the best guys that are playing, and then we went off to do or try our best at some of these tournaments. But it's fun how it blends on the boys' side. The girls' side, there's definitely a little bit more of a spread.
Yeah. Well, more opportunity and definitely more competition, just more
Yeah,
people, more girls playing. But hopefully that girls side, and we're seeing it, like you saying being in Nebraska, like we know about the volleyball game at outside at the stadium, in the
yeah,
football stadium this year. The way the women's game is leading to bring the men along, because who wouldn't want to play this amazing sport? And it's fun to watch it all grow together, because like I said, I mean, a generation ago there were a handful of teams of men.
mhm,
My generation, I know some guys that played in college, and we had one team in my little hometown of Fresno, and that coach is a legend today. He's friends with Costi because he was taking
yeah,
teams all the way to Santa Barbara to play because there weren't enough competition. It's like it's always about going and seeking that next level if you have the athletes that are hungry for it.
absolutely. That's a pretty cool
Yeah.
story. Oh yeah,
Oh, he's a legend. His name's Roy
you're dating
Verduzco.
Costi there. You're dating Costi there.
I Yeah, I know, right? I mean, that was back in the 80s. I graduated high school in 92, and there was there's a bunch of great volleyball teams that came out of Bullard High School in Fresno, California, and they had to travel far to find the competition.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, I mean, that's why I just have so much fun watching the sport grow. I want to just touching back one more time on that advice to a player. You hit on the playing time issue. That's obviously one of the biggest pain points that comes up in the club volleyball. And I don't even know college. By the time your kids get to college, I hope they're handling that stuff. And I'm a proponent of them handling it on their own in the club years as they
Mhm.
grow older. But do you have any advice for the mindset when you have a player that's struggling with playing time
Oh,
and
well,
how to handle that?
absolutely. So, you have to try to find a way to remove yourself from the issue, right? I think one of the first things that some people see with that is that's a personal issue between the coach and the player, right? The coach is trying to do what is best for the team. You have to try to still do what is best for the team, even though as a player you might not be playing. That is one of the first things that came to mind, as well as what we talked about before, right? Maybe there's another opportunity for you to find some value on that team, to find some impact on that team, right? Maybe you were trying to play on the left, right? But maybe you're a great blocker. Maybe that means there's an opportunity for you in the middle, right? Maybe you're a setter and maybe you're the second setter, right? And there's maybe your first setter is great and it's fun competing against them every day, but there's still some value you can bring elsewhere as a passer, right? As the libero, there's other opportunities you can do. Um, there are always going to be ways that you can find value as a serving sub, as a communicator, right? There are still ways to help your team out, even though you might not be playing a ton at the moment. Um, Another thing too is persistency gets people a lot of places, right? A lot of stories from great athletes, they didn't have what they wanted, right away when they were kids or when they were first getting into the game. I think one of the most popular stories that you hear narratives is from Michael Jordan, right? Getting
Yeah.
cut from his high school basketball team and then all of a sudden becoming one of the greatest players the world has ever seen in basketball, right? He was
Yeah.
persistent all throughout those years, right? Through all the times that he didn't win. And when he didn't see failure as failure, he saw failure as opportunity. And that is one of the biggest lessons that you can learn across sports is seeing failure as an opportunity, right? The
Yeah.
drive that you get from not getting what you want is only going to make you better long term as you keep training and keep playing. So if it comes down to there being other opportunities, look for anything you can do to help out your team, right? Whether that's
Yeah.
controlling what you have control over and being a great communicator, being a great teammate, whether that is finding another role, whether it be a serving sub or trying in a total different position, whether it's just understanding that it's not a personal feud between you and your coach. It is truly a decision, hopefully, right? And there's not always
Right.
a relationship, right? Hopefully it's a decision that is best for the team and that you have to understand that. And then just being persistent, right? Understanding that learning happens when you fail and you mess up, right? And that when you don't get what you have, when you don't get what you want right away, right? Maybe there's things that you're not doing as a player that could help you be there. Maybe there's reasons why there are the guys that are there in front of you because they do these extra things, they take the extra time, they show up early, right? All these intangible things that you can have, right? There's so many ways to go about answering that question, but persistency
Yeah.
is key. Learning that failure or understanding that failure is a great learning experience or a great opportunity for learning. Um, Looking for other opportunities. Um,
Yeah.
and just control what you have control over. There's so many things that you can go.
Yeah, all such good advice. All such good advice. And it takes me to when we were talking before we hopped on here about being up at those Stanford Sports Awards the
Mm.
other day, and really seeing what it's like to because they were telling the stories of these athletes that are winning these awards, and I mean to compete in that sea of greatness across sports, it just made me sit there and think like how do you find your authentic self in this place where everybody is so amazingly gifted at what they do? And we were talking about imposter syndrome a little bit. And so how have you found your way through that maze of competing at higher and higher levels when people are so amazingly accomplished to stay yourself and really find your joy?
Geez, well, the first thing I had to do was probably stop comparing myself to others. I wasn't I've heard the statement comparison is the thief of joy, and you know
Yeah.
the statement doesn't really mean much unless you've actually experienced it, of course. So it's with my experience as a player, every other outside that I had seen playing against with, right, they're all tall. We're all 6'5" plus. They have been playing outside since they were little kids. I had always played outside. I was always a volleyball player, but it was something that was a little bit newer for me in college, right? Even before I was playing outside, I remember comparing myself as a libero to other guys. When I was on the U16 select team, I was the top guy in the country that made that team, and that was a huge honor for me. And as time went on, other guys started to find their ways into the gym and started to find their way into that role that I was in as the top guy in that age group. And I just kept comparing myself to some of these players, and that was a large part of why I lost a little joy at times when competing in volleyball because I kept comparing myself with what other guys were having. I thought of myself as the best guy still. I was there a couple years ago. Why am I not there anymore? Right? What are these guys doing? I just constantly found myself in the state of comparing myself to others, and that didn't help my game at all. Right? And then it wasn't until I stopped comparing myself to other people, gave myself a little bit of grace over the opportunity itself, to where I really allowed myself to compete the best of my ability as an outside. Um, First couple of years, I found the way onto the court as a libero, part time as for defensive roles. I always found my way into a serving sub position. But when it got down to the outside position, I had nothing to even compare myself to. I hadn't done it before, so it was just having the freedom, right, to just go compete, giving myself a little bit of grace, and not being so hard on myself was big. That was a big reason why I was able to build some of that confidence, and ultimately that comes from not comparing yourself to the people around you, right? And just going
Yeah.
after it.
Yeah, such an important lesson in this, transfer portal era that we're in.
Mhm.
And, college sports has always been a place where the best of whatever area, even, in 1, 2, or 3, like the best people for that level are coming in. So you're going to find yourself wherever you're going, moving up to a level where everybody around you is better than where you came from. Right.
Absolutely.
And there's so much value in playing and competing and learning how to compete when the level rises. But so often that's a lesson that people don't realize until they're past it. I can't tell you how many people I know, my age or of past generations, that'll say like, gosh, I wish I knew that and maybe, it's a maturity thing. But to be able to hit that, like for people who are rising up to play in these bigger programs, realizing that serving sub or that this is part of the path of you always learn that lesson of somebody's better than you. And what can you learn from that other person? Like if you can go back, and this is part of the reason I love doing this podcast is because the generational learning, I'm just so passionate about it. But if you can tell that player, like, it's okay, like keep battling. When you come in as a freshman and you're not seeing anything, like don't jump ship yet, stick with it, because I think in this new age, and everyone wants to blame social media and instant gratification, the fact that we can get a package on our doorstep in 2 minutes, and everything is so much faster these days, those longer lessons that have to percolate a little bit, like stick with it, kid, because it totally changes your life on so many different levels.
Absolutely. And another way to think about your question before too is kind of stick to your strengths. I think some of the models that we have in the volleyball world, right? We have these guys that have found extreme success, right? They might be 7 foot as the opposite. Matt Anderson, he's been there forever, right? But how am I supposed to play like Matt Anderson when I'm a 6-foot player, right? I wasn't the guy that was going to overwhelm people with physicality on the court. However, I knew that I was a great communicator and had seen the game at a high level for a while. I just grew up seeing the game, right? I was able to perceive things a little bit quicker than some of my teammates at the time. Right. So that was where I could add value, and that's where I stuck to my strengths, right? Versus trying to be the guy that was going to go touch 12 feet, go be the biggest blocker in the court. It just wasn't my role. Right. And even though some of the guys I looked up to as outside hitters were physical attackers, physical blockers, that wasn't what I brought to the table as a guy in that position. So I think you're a new guy, you have a role model on your team. He might be extremely different than you in the way that he plays, right? Take the intangible things, take things that you have control over that they do very well, right? When I think back to Dane, it was the things that he controlled that he did very well, like have a positive attitude, give to his teammates, and just compete, right? We all have control over those things, right? It wasn't the fact that he could also maybe hit it 11.5 feet. He could then run an offense, right? It was different. I could look up to those things, think those are great, but I also think about who I am as a player too.
Yeah, that working from your strengths. I think it's so easy for athletes to see the things, always be seeking the things that they need to work on. But I'm such a big believer in working from your strengths, because it helps you bring up the back end every time. You'll have the energy because you are working from your strength to bring up whatever things you can work on. I totally agree. Yeah. So, like I said, the reason I started this podcast was just, in such large part to promote generational learning and have people learn from the stories of the people that came before them. And one of the questions I ask everybody that comes on the podcast is, what's a piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
Ooh. I think a piece of advice that I would give to myself as a kid would be, don't let the experiences of others shape the way that you make your own decisions. I think something I did as a kid was I heard all these testimonies from great athletes, right? I wanted to be exactly like them, and I tried to do the things that they did, right? And I think that sometimes contradicted maybe who I was as a player, who I was as a learner, right? I think I should have made some of those decisions as a kid for what I was looking for and what I wanted, not necessarily based on what other people had experienced beforehand. Another great example of that might be the decision I did to not play pro. Right, I love to get the coaching route. I wanted to get involved in coaching. I wanted to do those things, and that's where a lot of my decision came from. But also, right, I heard the stories 1,000 times of how many teams are going to want a 6 foot outside in Europe or Asia or anywhere, so that's South America, right? So their testimonies of their experiences not going so great of guys like me, right, might have inhibited my decision to go potentially play pro. right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking back on it, I'm very happy that I didn't, because I've had this great opportunity since, and I love my job and I've loved the people that I've worked with. But part of me is like to think like, oh, selfishly, like, oh, what could I have done as a player, and how fun would that have actually been if I went, right? But that's one example. Another piece of advice is to my younger self is understanding that failure is an opportunity for growth and learning. I think I was very hard on myself when I didn't get the few things that I wanted as a kid, right? I think I was very fortunate to have the coaches I did as a younger player, and to play for a club that was run through by my parents, and have volleyball a big part of my life. When I first started to not make some of those USA teams that I had been making, right, it was all blame put onto myself, and I didn't use those opportunities as chances to grow. I was more upset with why I was more curious with why I didn't make it, more curious as to why these guys were making it instead of me, right? I was asking all these questions versus just putting my nose to the stone and
Mm-hmm.
going for it, right? And grinding, right? It didn't motivate me.
Yeah.
It upset me more than it motivated me. And thinking back now, I would have loved to have that kind of mentality earlier, of understanding that failure is part of the process. You can learn from it, and it's only going to make you better in the long term.
So great. So great. I love for the younger players out there to hear this. And, it just makes me realize like you're so young, but from here, like you've already started such an amazing coaching career. What are your goals? Where do you want to go from here?
Oh, geez. For me, I want to learn as much as I can at Stanford, and I would like to be here for a long time. I think it's hard to think about where else I can go when I'm at a place that's almost that I consider the pinnacle of athletics, right? The place that does it the best out of anybody is Stanford, right? From small Olympic sports to people that are trying to grow our revenue generating sports again, right? We want people to have a full experience as student athletes, and live a life of greatness after they leave Stanford, and not just kind of have a return on their investment quickly when they're there for their 4 years. So that is something that Stanford does very well. It's amazing to work with some of the people I work with on a daily basis, from coaches and other staffs to just our staff with Taylor and John, and Matt and Aaron, Jamie, right? We had just incredible
Yeah.
people working together.
Love.
So again,
Yep. Yeah.
it's hard to think about what's next when um, I'm really focused on what we're doing now and learning from the
Yeah.
people that are around me. But
Yeah.
my world is in the volleyball world. I love the men's volleyball world, and I want to be part of the growth of the game, whether that be the club level or at the Division I collegiate level. Right, we got to keep growing the sport and making it the best level that we can. Right.
Well, you're definitely helping doing that. And it's been so fun to watch. And I thank you for this conversation, because it's helping me close out Luke's volleyball career, which just gave me so much joy to watch. And he knows that. And it was just, having that last season end and
Mm-hmm.
doing it with that team of guys that, to see the bond that they have and that you guys help foster. I can't thank you enough from a mother's perspective for being that for him and all those guys, because I love them all. They're so great.
And I'm in debt to those guys, because they were such a great group to come into as the first year as a coach. Right. When I saw those guys the other week, we were talking about it, and I've known these guys longer as a player than I have from a coaching perspective. So it's just, they came in, they accepted me with open arms. They were ready to go compete. Right. These are a lot of guys that were playing for the right reason, right? Playing for the people next to them. Right. And just, I'm grateful to have been part of that experience in any way. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I will definitely be at games next year. I'm excited to go watch and have Luke sit next to me, and we can break down the game together, because I'm not going away from the sport. I've loved it my whole life. And
that's the real reason why you have volleyball kids, is so that they can explain things to you as you get older. And right. And I
no
talk to
doubt.
my mom now, right? She's been part of the game forever, but when we sit down watching the game, we're breaking it down, asking questions. Why would they do this? Why would they do that? And instantly, she sees something different. She's like, "Oh, they're doing it wrong." I'm like, "Mom, it's not wrong. It's different. It's not the way that you might have done it, right?" But she was a great player in her defense, where she still has some records at her school for serving, and it's just funny seeing how she's still competitive through the whole process too, and it's fun.
Oh, yeah. No, I text my kids when I come off the beach. I had ankle surgery a couple of years ago. I just started playing again, and I text them, and I'm like, "Hey, I won all my games today." They're like, "Good job, Mom." Like, but once a fan and a player, it's a game you can play. What I love about volleyball is you watch anybody playing at any level, they're always having fun.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
whether it's a beach ball on the beach all the way up to the D1 and national, it's amazing, you know. So such a great sport and community. So thanks for being a part of it. I'm glad it connected us, and this conversation was fantastic. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate you for having me, and I wish you the best too, and everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell Luke we chatted today, and have a great summer, and we'll see you next year for sure.
Absolutely. I'll see you guys next year. Hopefully, I'm sure I'll see Luke around this summer as well, whether it's up on campus. And I know I'll see him back in the fall when he gets back to campus too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, take care.
You too. Have a great day.
We'll talk soon. All right, you too. Thank you for joining us on What I Meant to Say, another production of Inspired Edutainment brought to you by Be Better Media.